Welcome to these scary sleeping stories. These stories are like hypnosis. This hypnosis will help you to release stress and disturbing thoughts of the day so you can fall asleep within only a few minutes. It will also help you to sleep better through the night, while in the long run it will help you fall asleep faster from day to day. For this, it is best to repeat it at regular intervals to achieve the best results. If you want to leave the state of relaxation, you can simply open your eyes at any given time. You will be in full control and will be able to hear what is being said unless you are ready to sleep. Then you can let go of my words and drift off. You don't have to stay awake until the end either. If you are ready to sleep, you can do so at any time. I wish you a wonderful rest and a great sleep. Now make sure that everything is done dim or turn off the lights and make yourself really comfortable. Sit or lie down in a position where you can fully relax you like. You can pause the video until you have found your perfect resting position, and whenever you're ready, you can close your eyes. These stories, with soothing and calming rain sound, will help you fall asleep within 10 minutes. Before that, I request you to subscribe the channel and like the video. Also, where are you from and what time are you listening? It was a dreary autumn afternoon when Claire Simmons, a weary journalist from the city, arrived at the old rest house deep in the woods. She had been looking for an escape from the bustle of city life, and this isolated house seemed perfect for her weekend retreat. Tucked away in the forest, the rest house had a reputation for offering solitude, away from the noise, away from the chaos. As Claire drove along the narrow, winding path leading to the house, the air grew colder and the trees thickened. The sun was already dipping behind the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the forest floor. The place was remote, so remote that she had to follow a barely visible dirt road to get there. When she finally reached the rest house, Claire could barely make out its silhouette against the fading light. The house stood in disrepair, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It looked as if it hadn't been occupied in years, maybe even decades. Her instincts screamed for her to turn around and leave, but something held her there. Maybe it was the allure of silence, or maybe it was the pull of adventure. After all, she had heard the rumors. Locals said it was haunted, cursed by a tragic event long ago. But Claire was a skeptic. She had been to haunted places before, written about them for her articles. None had ever truly scared her. The air was still as she stepped out of her car, with the silence pressing in on her. With one last glance at the surrounding woods, she grabbed her suitcase and walked up the creaky front steps. The door groaned as she pushed it open, and the smell of must and dampness filled the air. The inside was just as worn as the exterior. Old furniture, faded wallpaper, and layers of dust. It was a mess, but it would serve as the perfect place to unwind, away from the distractions of her busy life. Claire unpacked quickly, and as night fell, she lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. She poured herself a glass of wine, settling into the armchair by the crackling fire. The sound of the wind howling outside, the crackling of the fire, and the eerie silence of the house were all she could hear. The isolation felt oppressive, but it was also peaceful in a way. But as the night wore on, an unsettling feeling settled over her. Every now and then, she thought she heard a faint whisper, like someone was standing just behind her, too close. She spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. She brushed it off, blaming the isolation, the stress of her city life. But that night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned. This time, they were louder, clearer. Claire. The The voice was faint, almost like a breath on her ear. She bolted upright, her heart racing. But there was no one. Only the shadows, pressing in from all sides. The next morning, Claire tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, the effects of too much wine, or maybe the house settling. But as the day stretched into evening, the strange occurrences began again. This time, there was no mistaking it. A cold breeze swept through the room, causing the fire to flicker and the shadows to dance. The lights began to flicker, as though something was interfering with the power supply. Claire stood up, annoyed. She wasn't one to be easily spooked, but something about this house felt wrong. She decided to explore the rest house to distract herself. The place was even more unsettling in the daylight. Old portraits lined the walls, faces frozen in time, their eyes following her every movement. The floors creaked underfoot, as if the house itself was alive, watching her. Claire's eyes fell on the door leading to the attic. It was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed it open. The attic was dark, filled with old, forgotten items. Dusty furniture, old trunks, and piles of yellowed newspapers. She began to sift through them, looking for something, anything, to explain the strange atmosphere. Then, buried under a pile of old newspapers, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a family portrait, the same faces that were on the walls, but this one was different. It had a strange aura about it, as if the people in the picture were more than just people. They seemed, trapped. Suddenly, she heard a soft thud behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but again, there was nothing, only the stillness of the attic. Claire quickly left the room, her mind racing. Something was definitely wrong here. The picture, those eyes, kept flashing in her mind. Who were they? And why did they look so desperate? That night, the hauntings intensified. She was woken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Her pulse quickened as she sat up, straining to listen. The footsteps continued, soft but distinct, as if someone was pacing outside her door. She grabbed her phone, turning on the flashlight. But the moment the beam hit the hallway, the footsteps stopped. She crept to the door, her hand trembling, as she slowly turned the knob. She opened it just enough to peek out, but there was no one. Only the darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she was about to close the door when she saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of her flashlight. It was pale, translucent, its eyes empty. No, hollow. The figure moved closer, slowly, without making a sound. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She backed into her room, slamming the door shut. Her mind raced. Was this a prank? Was someone in the house with her? She couldn't explain the figure, the way it moved like a shadow. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her trance. It was a message from a local acquaintance. I heard you're staying at the Blackwood Rest House. I should have warned you. The place is cursed. It was then that Claire began to understand. The ghost, the whispers, the shadow. It wasn't a coincidence. Something horrible had happened here. Something tied to the past. As the days went by, Claire's paranoia grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the house was alive, feeding off her fear. She started to research the history of the rest house, searching old newspapers and public records. What she uncovered chilled her to the bone. The rest house had once been owned by Edward Blackwood, a wealthy and eccentric man who built the house in the mid-19th centuries. He lived there with his wife, Eleanor, and their 2 young children, Henry and Alice. The Blackwoods were well respected in the community, until one fateful night when everything changed. On that night, a fire broke out in the rest house, killing Eleanor and the children. Edward was never found. Some believed he had set the fire himself, driven mad by grief or jealousy. Others whispered that he had died in the fire, trying to save his family. But his body was never recovered, and the house was left to decay, its reputation tarnished by tragedy. The ghost, Claire realized, was not just any restless spirit. It was Edward Blackwood, the haunted soul of a man who had lost everything, driven to madness by his inability to protect his family. The more Claire delved into the history, the more she realized that the house had always been a place of sorrow, a place where tragedy lingered in every creaking floorboard, every whisper in the walls. The ghost, Edward, was trapped in a loop of grief, tormenting anyone who dared to enter. As night fell once again, Claire knew she couldn't stay any longer. The house had worn her down, mentally, emotionally, physically. She had to leave. But when she tried to pack, the house seemed to fight her. The door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The windows, which had been open just moments before, were now sealed tight. The air grew colder, and Claire heard it again. The footsteps, the whispers, the unmistakable sound of someone moving in the shadows. And then she saw him again, Edward Blackwood, standing at the end of the hallway, watching her with those hollow eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Edward's voice echoed in her mind, distorted, agonized. "I couldn't save them. I couldn't save them." Claire's heart raced as she realized this wasn't just a ghost seeking vengeance. It was a soul crying for redemption. Edward was trapped in his own guilt, unable to move on, unable to let go of the past. The only way to escape, Claire understood, was to help him. She spoke aloud, her voice shaking with fear. "I'm sorry for what happened. I know it wasn't your fault. You couldn't save them, but you can let them go now. You can rest." For a moment, there was silence, and then the figure of Edward began to fade, his form becoming less distinct, more transparent. The temperature in the room rose as the oppressive air lifted. Finally, the door to the rest house swung open, and the wind outside seemed to breathe again. Claire stepped outside, her body trembling from the ordeal. As she looked back at the rest house, she saw one final glimpse of Edward's figure in the window, his face serene for the first time. With the sun rising on the horizon, Claire left the cursed place behind, the rest house now silent and still. She knew that Edward's spirit had finally found peace, but she also knew she would never forget the terrifying week she had spent in the Blackwood rest house. Claire drove away from the Blackwood rest house, the sun casting long shadows on the dirt road behind her. The weight of the ordeal still lingered in her chest, her mind replaying Edward's anguished words. She thought she was free, but as she reached the edge of the forest, her car sputtered to a halt. The engine coughed and died, leaving her stranded in the encroaching twilight. Panic set in as Claire stepped out of the car. The woods felt different now, darker, denser, as if they were alive. She fumbled with her phone, but there was no signal. The only path forward was to return to the rest house for help, a thought that filled her with dread. The walk back felt interminable. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches creaking as if they were leaning in to watch her. When she finally reached the rest house, it looked different. The peeling paint was gone, the windows no longer boarded up. The house seemed new. Claire hesitated on the front steps, but the door opened on its own, beckoning her inside. Inside, the rest house was no longer decrepit. The wallpaper was vibrant, the furniture polished. The air was warm, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. Voices echoed faintly through the hall. Laughter, a child's giggle, the hum of a piano. "Hello?" Claire called, her voice trembling. She followed the sounds to the parlor, where a family sat by the fire. Edward Blackwood was there, his face no longer hollow, but radiant with joy. Beside him sat a woman with delicate features, Eleanor, and two children, Henry and Alice, playing on the rug. "Claire," Edward said, his voice calm, "you've come back." I don't understand," Claire stammered. "You're free. I helped you move on." Edward smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You did. But the house, it doesn't let go so easily." Before Claire could respond, the scene around her began to shift. The vibrant room darkened, the laughter replaced by screams. The fire in the hearth flared violently, its heat searing. Edward and his family stood, their faces twisted in terror. "Run!" Eleanor screamed, clutching her children. "It's happening again." Claire stumbled back as the room erupted into chaos. Flames licked the walls, smoke filling the air. The screams grew louder, piercing. She turned and fled, her lungs burning, her vision blurred by tears and smoke. Claire burst into the hallway, only to find it endless, stretching far beyond what the house's dimensions should allow. Doors slammed open and shut, shadowy figures darting just out of sight. She ran blindly, the whispers now a cacophony of angry voices. "You shouldn't have come," they hissed. "This is our home." Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her wrist. Claire screamed, turning to face the figure, but it wasn't Edward. It was a young woman, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't leave yet," the woman said, her voice urgent. "The house won't let you." "Who are you?" Claire demanded, pulling free. "I'm Eleanor's sister," the woman whispered. "I came here after the fire to find them, but the house trapped me." Claire's mind raced. How do we stop it? The woman hesitated, then spoke quickly. "The house feeds on pain, on fear. It keeps them here, Edward, Eleanor, the children. It keeps me here. But it has a heart, a core. You have to destroy it." "What core? Where is it?" Claire asked. The woman replied, her form flickering like a dying flame. "But it won't let you go without a fight." Claire raced up the stairs, the walls groaning as if the house were alive. The attic door was ajar, just as it had been before. She pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit space. At the center of the room was a pulsating mass of darkness, a shadowy heart that seemed to beat with malevolent energy. Around it, spectral figures writhed in agony, the souls the house had consumed. As Claire approached, the shadows coalesced into a monstrous form, towering over her. It had no face, only gaping voids where its eyes should have been. "You dare defy me?" it roared, its voice shaking the walls. Claire's hands trembled, but she held her ground. She spotted a rusted candlestick nearby and grabbed it, wielding it like a weapon. The creature lunged at her, its claws swiping through the air. She dodged, striking at the dark mass with all her strength. The shadow shrieked, its form splintering. The attic filled with blinding light as the dark heart began to crack. Claire struck again and again, each blow weakening the creature. With one final swing, the heart shattered, releasing a burst of energy that knocked Claire to the floor. The screams of the trapped souls turned into sighs of relief as they ascended into the light, their torment finally over. When Claire woke, the rest house was gone. In its place was an empty clearing, the forest eerily quiet. Her car was parked nearby, its engine purring softly as if it had never stalled. She climbed into the car and drove away, the events of the past days etched into her memory. As she reached the edge of the forest, she glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, she saw Edward and his family standing in the clearing, their faces peaceful. Edward raised a hand in silent thanks before they faded into the morning mist. Claire never wrote about her experience at the Blackwood Rest House. Some stories, she realized, were too dark to share. But every autumn, when the leaves began to fall and the air grew cold, she couldn't help but think of Edward, of the house, and of the souls who had finally found peace.